everybody. My name is Peter Handley, and I'm the head of the Energy Intensive Industry and Raw Materials Unit in DG Grow. It's very nice to see people back in this place after the gap last year, and I hope it's going to be a very interesting week for everybody. I'm going to make just 2 or 3 very quick remarks. The first is on COVID safety. Brussels is getting back into a quite difficult period, so it's very important that everyone respects the COVID rules, which involve showing a COVID pass when you enter, keeping your distance from people, so don't necessarily all cluster in the same part of the room, and keeping a mask on at all times unless you are speaking or eating, okay? It's very important. And keep your distance also in the networking periods of time. Second remark is that for most of the week's sessions, we'll be using Slido to collect questions. So, for example, after we've had the introductory speak, we'll go straight into the first panel. At any time, you can post your questions or remarks on Slido, and we have a moderator who will be selecting questions that we can take during the Q&A session. And then lastly, I will be inviting my director, Joaquin Nunes de Almeida, to give a welcome speech on behalf of the European Commission. Joaquin? Joachim, we are waiting for your speech.
I'm here. I was kicked out for some reason. Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Fine.
Yeah, can you hear me? Good. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this event, in person or online. And it's my great pleasure to open this 6th Raw Materials Week. We hope that during the week, full of raw material topics, you'll gain a lot of useful knowledge and create fruitful contacts with new partners, which is a primary reason why we organize these weeks. I'd like to thank the co-organizers, the Critical Raw Materials Expert Network Screen 2, for their invaluable input and efforts in preparation of the event. It has been 2 years since the last meeting on critical raw materials during the Raw Materials Week, and a lot has happened. We are all aware that pressure on resources will increase, increasing global population, industrialization, and increasing demand from developing countries which want to develop as much as we have. Aside from these long-term trends, we have also seen global events putting strain on our global supply chains. The COP26 summit made it clear that we are not even on track to limit climate change to 2 degrees. The effects of this are already noticeable in our daily lives and in our supply chains. And as we speak, we're facing acute supply shortages to the detriment of our manufacturing industries. Access to resources is a strategic security question. It determines our ability to deliver on the Green Deal ambition for climate neutrality and a digitally connected Europe. It also impacts our ambitions on defense, space, and competitiveness. Raw materials are a critical input to Europe's energy-intensive industries, such as steel or chemicals, which supply many ecosystems from agri-food to construction, from renewable energy to future mobility. We also understand that with growing resource production and consumption, it becomes increasingly important to address issues related to sustainability of mining operations, including decarbonization, circularity, and environmental and social impacts, as well as traceability of supply chains, not to forget the ethical dimension and the need to ensure that we act in accordance with our values. Let's talk about the list and the action plan. So since 2008, we have been monitoring raw materials. In 2011, we published the first list of critical raw materials for the EU, and in 2020, its fourth iteration. These lists are the result of thorough assessments of our dependencies and capacities based on factual evidence. Throughout the years, we have seen that the situation is not getting better. Therefore, we accompanied the list with 10 actions to improve our supply chain's resilience and to push the sustainability of the raw materials we consume. I will not go into detail since the first session is entirely devoted to this topic, but I'd like to at least outline our course of action and where it has already borne fruit. The first line is to go beyond raw materials and consider the resilience of the complete value chain. And for this, we created the European Raw Materials Alliance. The second is to improve our circularity, which is still low, and plagued by knowledge gaps. And for this, we're investing substantially into R&I. The third is to make better our use of domestic potential, still critically underused, and for this we need and we will work with the member states. And lastly, we have to cooperate more outside of the EU. We have forged strategic partnerships already with Canada and the Ukraine and are engaging the next partners. Still in international, we're also using our long-standing venues of engagement to discuss and address raw material issues with like-minded countries and partners, such as the EU, US, Japan trilateral, that has been expanded into a pentalateral with Canada and Australia in 2020. And this will take place on the 6th and 8th of December this year. Now let's move on to criticality assessment. The list of critical raw materials has been a very good predictor of supply issues coming to a head now. Of course, this intelligence needs to be kept up to date, and we're now in the process of putting everything in place for the next assessment, which produces an update of the list every 3 years. These lists identify raw materials linked with a high risk of supply, to which securing reliable and unhindered access is important for European industrial base and value chains. We expand on materials when we can and when it makes sense. Over the time, we also refine the methodology to better reflect supply issues and demand situation, for example, where the EU is sourcing from and which sectors are using the raw materials. A vital part of our assessment are the fact sheets for all the materials. These give extra information, differing viewpoints and considerations. They are a wealth of information. And for the next assessment, Screen 2 is supporting us with updating them, drawing on their wide network of experts. I'd like to thank the project Screen 2 for their support in this specific task, but also for their support in the overall exercise, including the validation workshops, which ensure that our data is solid and reviewed. In 2020, we included a report on critical raw materials for strategic technologies and sectors, which not only gives an overview of current bottlenecks for 9 technologies, but adds a foresight dimension to our work. We will continue this. The list of critical raw materials and related information gathered through the assessment are very important for us to draft good policies and make right decisions. We use the information in different policy areas such as trade, industry, international relations, circular economy, and research and innovation. Turning now to R&D funding for critical raw materials. So, over the period 2014-2020, we've mobilized large research and innovation budget under Horizon 2020. We channeled around 600 million euro into raw materials related research, developing technology and non-technology solutions for entire value chains from exploration, extraction, processing to recycling, and for developing substitutes for most critical applications. Under Horizon Europe, we address research and investment for a secure and sustainable supply of raw materials needed for a climate-neutral, circular and clean industry. We are allocating 1 billion euro to research on raw materials over the course of this framework program. And in 2021, we launched 18 projects on 6 topics. For 2022, we're looking for 20 projects working on exploration, policy frameworks, digital solutions for the extractive industries, recovery of secondary materials, and Earth observation technologies. Today, you'll have an opportunity to see some of the most promising projects in the parallel event organized by our colleagues from our agency, HADEA. You will have an opportunity to hear a lot more about all our Horizon Europe programming tomorrow at the dedicated info and brokerage event. Now, to conclude, today you will hear more about the Commission's action plan on critical raw materials in growing sectors, technology opportunities for mining, recycling, and substitution of critical raw materials, and opportunities in a circular economy from our distinguished guests. For the first time, there's also an after-event session with Guillaume Pitron, journalist and author who has written extensively about the geopolitics of raw materials. I would like to thank all the experts who help us with the critical raw materials assessments and actions, and I would like to thank our international partners for their good cooperation. I hope you will enjoy the presentations and the panel discussions today. Thank you very much for your attention, and once again, a warm welcome to the Raw Materials Week.
Thank you very much, Joachim. So we can now move to the first panel. Could I just ask the organizers to put up on screen the details of the Slido? If you can just put up the Slido so people know what the right address is if they wish to post any questions. And while you're doing that, let me introduce the members of the first panel. So we have furthest from me, member of my team, one of our very deep experts in raw materials, Milan Groho. Next to him, from European Innovation and Technology on Raw Materials, KIC EIT, and from the European Raw Materials Alliance, we have Roland Gauss, and from the French Ministry of Ecological Transition, we have Eric Buisson. Each of them is going to give a presentation of around 12 minutes. There will be a clock in front, but I will also not hesitate to ask you to speed up and wrap up if necessary, because we'd like to leave around 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. Q&A both from the Slido that I've already mentioned and from people in the room, okay? So if you're in the room, you want to ask a question, the old-fashioned method, hands in the air, and someone will give you a microphone. Okay, off we go then. Milan, you're first.
Thank you. I'll try if the presentation works. Okay, so before the presentation starts, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Milan Grohol. I work in the team of Peter Handley, as he mentioned. I would like to warmly welcome you also on behalf of the organizing team. Franziska and Soraya and me, we are here during the whole week for you if you need any help with any of the events. Today I will try to go to to 2 points already mentioned by my director Joachim. One would be the criticality assessment update, and the second one would be the update on the EU Critical Raw Materials Action Plan. So, just a small reminder, 1 year ago, we published a very important document following the update of the industrial strategy of the EU, which is the communication on critical raw materials, including 2 important parts, EU Action Plan on Critical Raw Materials and the list of the EU Critical Raw Materials. The list is here. These are 30 critical raw materials. As you see, there are 4 new ones, which have never been before on the list, and bauxite, as you noticed in the recent time, caused certain supply disruptions. We published a package of documents together with the list and in the communication. One of them, the background report, then the set of fact sheets for all the screened raw materials, and the first of its kind foresight study on critical raw materials for strategic technologies and sectors. One of the results of this assessment has been the recognition of our huge dependence on concentrated supply, many times just from one major supplier. And as you see on this slide, China is the dominating one for 7 critical raw materials and all rare earths. Small overview, we screened 83 individual raw materials in the last assessment. We plan to continue with this same set, potentially expanding it. We covered industrial minerals and construction materials, iron and steel alloying elements, precious, non-ferrous metals, rare earths, biomaterials, and other materials. That's very important, wide range of materials which we want to know about. We used the refined methodology of 2017 in the last assessment. Is based on economic importance and supply risk. The official link for the methodology is there at the bottom of the slide. Here I would like to mention that the slides will be available online, and we will ask all the speakers for the slides to be published if they agree. This is an important information for you. We already prepared for the next criticality assessment 2023. It's called like that because the list is expected to be published in 2023, but most of the work will be done next year in 22. We will do similarly to the first assessment in 2010-11, the assessment in-house in our general directorate, together with the external experts and our ad hoc working group on criticality. We also try to build up our pool of external experts, so you are interested to help us. You are good with working with data and statistics, and you know some of the screened raw materials. Please let us know and sign into the expert database, which is the same as we use for the Horizon evaluations. We will organize also expert workshops together with our colleagues from Screen2 project. We plan to publish also a new set of fact sheets, these ones to be developed by Screen2 as well, and also validated by our ad hoc working group on criticality. We will expand our foresight study, which we have done, to new technologies, and this will be done with our colleagues from Joint Research Center and again Screen2 project. And in parallel, we will run a material systems analysis, which will feed into the criticality assessment, which will be done in-house with an external contractor. I would like to mention maybe one thing which is quite important for next week. There will be a vote for the European Parliament report on critical raw material strategy, and one of the recommendations may be to look deeper into the methodology, and that's what we also plan to do with the Screen 2 project. Okay, and now let's dive into the 10 actions which we published last year. First two actions are to strengthen the resilience of the EU value chains. Actions 3 to 4 are to improve the circularity. Actions 5, 6, 7, and 8 are to improve the domestic supply of raw materials, and actions 9 and 10 will target the international supply and international partnerships. Starting with the first one, I will not spend too much time on European Raw Materials Alliance, because the next speaker, Roland Gauss, is coming from is actually one of the core persons of the Alliance. Plus, there will be a dedicated session on investment session on Wednesday, high-level conference. What is good to know that the Alliance has grown already to over 600 organizations. It's organized in 2 clusters, rare earths and magnets, and second cluster on energy conversion and storage. Alliance already collected over 100 investment cases, and Roland will present the action plan on rare earths, magnets, and motors, which has been just finalized and published in September. ERMA also helped to set up a clean technology materials task force to foster investment into the critical raw materials. And ERMA also supports us in the strategic raw materials partnerships with third countries. I would like to also note that there are 2 events on Friday, one the anniversary of the Alliance, and then the Cluster 2 event. Okay. Second action is the sustainable financing criteria for mining. This is a very important action to mobilize investment for exploration, mining, and processing projects in critical raw materials, which would be done in a sustainable and responsible way. The work is ongoing. It's a lot of heated discussion. The work will continue in the next year. Joachim already mentioned the big budget which we have under raw materials part of Horizon Europe. Practically the budget doubled compared to Horizon 2020 in the area of raw materials per year. We have sets of actions supporting not only actions on research and innovation, 3 and 8, but also several other actions. I will mention them during the presentation. And again, warm welcome to tomorrow's event on Horizon Raw Materials Info Day and Brokerage in the afternoon in this room. Just beware, the deadline for the next calls is 30th of March, which is quite close. Regarding the actions 4 and 5, which is mapping the potential for primary and secondary raw materials, which are for us equally important, is going quite well. We try to identify promising projects. We try to map them under the United Nations classification framework to allow us to compare also not only economic performance, but also environmental, social sustainability of the projects. There will be a specific event on that on Thursday in the morning in this room. And we have launched also 2 Horizon calls, very relevant to this mapping. One is on identifying the future availability of secondary raw materials, and then a call on to help the European Geological Surveys or national agencies to do the proper mapping across the EU. As you see on the right side, there is a good potential in the European Union. Action 6 on expertise and skills. As you see on the right map, we mapped the existing coal regions and the potential for battery raw materials production and plant or existing factories for batteries. And we see quite good overlap in some of the regions, and we believe that just transition mechanism could support the transformation of these regions into regions supplying critical raw materials and to keep the expertise and skills in these regions. I would like to mention also that EIT Raw Materials has its own academy providing master's and PhD education, lifelong learning, wider society learning, and we will hear about it tomorrow morning at the Future Trends Innovation and Skills event with the EIT Raw Materials. Seventh action is the Earth observation, and my colleagues developed together with the colleagues from DG DEFIS and the European Space Agency a concept of the Earth observation platform for raw materials, including mineral exploration tools, mining monitoring tools, Copernicus data and capacity which exists under the EIT to form a platform by 2024. And if you want to hear more, we will have tomorrow afternoon an online session on that, so you are welcome to listen to it. And the ninth action is the international side of our sourcing of raw materials, developing strategic international partnerships. There are two which are in an advanced stage, EU-Canada and EU-Ukraine. Both have been signed in the summer, in June and July. They cover similar issues. We go for, in Canada case, we go for integration of the supply chains. We would like to work together on research and development. We would like to work on the environmental, social, and governance standards. With Ukraine, we also want to build up the capacity and digitalization and modernization of the extractive industries. Regarding EU-Latin America, very long-term partnership, we would like to invite you to the Convention on Raw Materials 21 next week on Thursday, Friday. This will be an online event. And regarding EU-Africa partnership, we are relaunching the process and we launched the call to strengthen the collaboration with Africa, with certain countries. And we will have a dedicated event on Thursday afternoon focused on knowledge needs. And the last one, the last action is to promote responsible production of raw materials or mining. I would like to highlight two regulations which are very important to ensure due diligence. One is the batteries regulation proposal, and the second one is the conflict minerals regulation. And I would like to highlight one document which is in the corridor, are the EU Sustainable Principles for Raw Materials, which have been published in September. These are principles for the operations in the EU. And that's all. Thank you very much, and warm welcome again.
Thank you, Milan. Now, Roland, please.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this for a kind introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here to speak at this great conference. And of course, I need to start off with the most important topic society's debates today, and that's climate change. And I firmly believe that raw materials and advanced materials are the key enablers for our transition to climate neutrality. So as we are moving from a brown economy to a green economy, and moving from a dependency on fossil fuels used for combustion engines, generators, power stations, and so on and so forth, into a growing dependency for functional materials used in electric motors, energy storage, and conversion technologies. And these technologies need raw materials, critical raw materials, but also strategic raw materials of high economic importance. So we are really experiencing a fundamental shift in the resource basis of our society. Now, if Europe really wants to be a leader in this transition to the green economy, we need to strategically invest into the full materials value chain of these materials. And this includes the exploration, mining and extraction, the manufacturing of sustainable materials and products, as well as recycling. Now, the challenge is that for many of those materials that we're desperately needing for this transition to happen, they're produced only in few places in the world. In many cases, actually in one country. And I'm talking about, on the one hand, extraction, mining, but also the processing. So here you see on the left-hand side a diagram published by the International Energy Agency showing the high production concentration of metals like copper, nickel, cobalt, lithium, and rare earth. It's really the processing stage that is controlled primarily in one country, which is China. So we lack today supply chain diversification, transparency, standards, and I think most importantly, the industrial capacity in Europe to establish a full circular economy of these materials. So one group of materials of particular concern are rare earth elements. So if you look at the example of wind energy, if we follow this Fit for 55 package that was developed by the European Commission and the member states, and we really believe in transitioning, this Fit for 55 package and its targets would correspond to a high demand scenario as forecasted by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. So we really see an exponential growth in EU rare earth demand. And you can see here two diagrams showing the growth of onshore wind capacity and offshore wind capacity, and the red dot really indicates the target of the Fit for 55 wind capacity. So it would correspond to exponential growth in rare earth permanent magnet demands used in those installations from about 7,000 tons today to more than 20,000 tons by 2030. Now, the production in the rare earth value chain is highly concentrated in one country, which results in high supply risk and speculation. You can see here that from the rare earth mining, oxide mining, processing, metals making, magnet making, and you can see it also for the respective recycling schemes. This is almost exclusively done in China. So if we want to maintain our leadership in wind turbine manufacturing and in the installation of sustainable wind energy, we need to get some grip on the upper part of the value chain. So, of course, we believe in global supply chains, we believe in collaboration worldwide. However, we also believe in innovation and competition, resilience, diversification. So we need to have some alternative supply chains. Rare earth metals and magnets can be produced responsibly, and it's really up to us to decide which process and supply chain we use. So this is a diagram showing comparatively the global warming potential of 1 kilogram of neodymium iron boron according to various LCA reports and supply chains. You can see that on the primary sourcing part, there's a huge variation, and then the lowest footprint come with recycling. So it's really up to us where we source these most important materials for product manufacturing and deployment in Europe. Now you have this picture now in mind of primary versus the footprint of primary versus those of secondary raw materials, secondary rare earth materials. Now, at the same time, we need to acknowledge the importance of mining in this context, particularly if you look at these exponentially growing technology markets. So this is just an example for electric vehicles. For instance, if we want to use recycled materials for the manufacturing and sale of electric vehicles by 2030, and if you assume a lifetime of 10 years of an electric vehicle, and that's already assuming 10 years is actually quite a short period. Usually they're 15, 20 years on the road. But assuming it's 10 years, you would only have the material for recycling, which you could use by 2030, of those cars sold in 2020. So you really see the huge gap of what is available from recycling in an optimum way towards what's actually going to be needed and required. So there's really a need for mining and processing, mining and primary materials processing in this full loop towards a sustainable raw materials supply chain. Now, there are several competing industries and technologies for rare earth materials. So we talked about wind energy, we talked about electric vehicles, but they are also used in high energy efficient servo motors in industry, in robots, in robotic arms, and so on and so forth, and in mobile communication technology. Why? Because rare earth permanent magnets offer the best opportunity to manufacture small and compact devices because of their high energy density. Now, in this context, the European Commission launched the European Raw Materials Alliance last year under the leadership of Commissioner Breton and Vice President Šefčovič, with a vision to secure access to critical and strategic raw materials, advanced materials, and processing know-how for the EU industrial ecosystems. Now we've gathered a network of more than 1,000, we're approaching the 1,500 individuals actually, from more than 600 organizations in 50 different countries. We are organized in two major work streams. One, a stakeholder consultation process to really understand what's going wrong. Why do we have a declining a metallurgical and mining industry, and why are we not having the same exponential growth as we see in so many green technologies? This should go hand in hand. Why is it not taking place? So we need to have this dialogue and understand key bottlenecks. And then we have a second part, which is more a confidential case-by-case approach, trying to identify promising investment cases that could really make a difference in this sector. And we organized in two clusters so far: rare earth magnets and motors, and then materials for energy storage and conversion. Now the rare earth cluster has actually grown to 400 members now, with a strong industry participation, but also participation from universities. We have an NGO in this particular group, national authorities, ministries, financial institutions, and associations. Now, I just showed here a few logos of actually downstream companies. Why am I showing this? Because it's so important, and we make an extra effort to really include not only raw materials companies and recycling companies and mining companies, but also those companies that really produce these products and launch them into the market. And we, as Milan mentioned before, we just published this European Call for Action, a report that really collects and gathers all the outcomes of the debate. Now this slide shall summarize a little bit the challenges of these industries along the value chain. Upstream companies face really a lack of investment today in Europe. They've challenged with this huge price volatility, a lack of social license to operate, limited R&D capacity compared to Asia, and a lack, most importantly, a lack of level playing field in terms of tax schemes and subsidies. It's very difficult for these companies to go online. Downstream companies focus on cost, performance, environmental footprint. Yet they're faced today, in the case of rare earth particularly, with a small monopole upstream market and the lack of transparent and sustainable supply chains. Now, the idea is really to bring them all together along this value chain and to find solutions together in terms of risk sharing across the value chain, by long-term supply contracts, diversifying supply chains really, collaborative R&D, and joint public and private investments. and raising awareness for the subject matter. Now, the report and the call for action really comes to concludes with 4 key recommendations. So I mentioned before, we need to create this level playing field, drive a commitment by EU OEMs to really also buy from EU rare earth industry, make end-of-life products containing rare earths stay in Europe, so we incentivize, we kick off this circular economy, and to provide some CAPEX support to kick off investment. And this translates into kind of more detailed, granular, specific 12 action points, which you see here. So, and these actions are closely intertwined and linked to the EU critical raw materials action plan we heard before. Yeah? So it's more like developing these bigger actions and applying them in a more detailed manner to the specific rare earth market. So we need, also in the case of rare earths, we need to identify sources for the EU. This is not only within the EU in its boundaries, but also beyond, with global trade partnerships. We need to incentivize a circular economy of rare earths. We need to make sure we have access to finance to really push these investment cases forward. We need to talk about EU standards and certification schemes. What is a sustainable rare earth? What is a sustainable magnet? What is our ambitions here as Europeans if we want to lead this green transition? We need to invest into transparent supply chains, promote ethical sourcing, create this level playing field I mentioned before. So European companies should have the same conditions to get access to rare earth raw materials, if you think of magnet makers, for instance. So we need to create the same market conditions. We need to have a dedicated program to raise awareness. We think it would be helpful to have this kind of rare earth research factory. We want to promote research and mobility all across Europe, and of course consider related rare earth topics for Horizon Europe program. I don't have the time to go in detail now and describe in detail these individual actions. Please reach out, read the report, and engage in the discussion. Just to show you that we have in Europe rare earth possibilities to develop rare earth operations all across the value chain, from mining, extraction, processing, metal making, alloy making, permanent magnet making, recycling. We still have these capacities in terms of skills, but also specific projects. And this is just showing example projects that we identified over the first year. There are many more, and it's really up to us to really kick off this process, get into this rare earth industry to really make it grow in Europe again and interconnected with global partnerships. And just to show with this final slide, these projects that you just seen, if you look today in 2019, 2020, there's hardly any EU production in magnet rare earth oxide extraction and processing, alloy making in magnets. But you see in comparison to that, the EU demand about 16,000 to 18,000 tons of magnets each year. And if you see the growth towards 2030, if these projects were financed, if they were really, get approval, we already today would be able to meet about 20% of EU demand. And this is only after a couple of months interacting with industries and other stakeholders. There's a huge potential, and I'm very much looking forward to see these projects go online. So with this, I would like to end my talk, and I'm very much looking forward also to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roland. And now over to you, Eric.
Thank you, Milan, for your presentation and update on the EU Action Plan. And thank you, Roland, too, for your inspiring ERMA presentation and call for action. Also, thank you, Screen Team and European Commission in general for the invitation. I'll be speaking as an EU member state administration on the question of critical raw materials. And and with the recommendation of the screen team on a special focus on batteries and the batteries strategy in Europe. So who are we? I work at the French Mineral Resources Policy Department, which is part of the Ministry for the Environmental Transition, and we contribute to policy making for the Ministry of Industry. Our policies are, of course, closely related to the extractive industry. I'll rapidly digress on a short presentation on the extractive industries in France. It's in itself, of course, a reasonable value of French GDP, and does an important contribution related to mineral transformation and metallurgy. About 2,000 companies, 110,000 employees, great R&D centers, public and private. Some significant resources and exploration permits, and I'll get back to that. It's also important to note that there's great know-how in terms of refining and metallurgy, as well as a few French mining companies, of course Eramet, Orano, and also Imerys, who is an important player in the extractive business. Regarding actual mineral resources in the French geological heritage, I think we could point out a few interesting resources relevant to this presentation, and of course lithium, both in geothermal sources, but also in hard rock mining in central France. Of course, those are potentials, those correspond to exploration permits, but they are indeed quite interesting. To come back to our presentation, our role is, of course, to bridge expertise regarding critical raw materials. We do this with the help of a few of our partners, of course, BRGM, our geological survey, CEA, and then the Agency for the Environmental Transition. And we try to bring together all of this expertise with the COMES, the Committee for Strategic Metals, which involves a few French companies. So what are our actions regarding critical raw materials? Well, of course, there's bringing together all of this expertise and savoir-faire, but there's also the development of a resilience plan in France following the COVID crisis, which was an occasion for developing a few acceleration strategies, and some of them clearly include critical raw materials and the battery industry. And then, of course, one of those key questions for policymaking is, of course, coordination between the different ministries. We have the pleasure of discussing with the French Foreign Affairs Ministry and a few others, and through this we ensure policy on critical raw materials. But policy cannot be done without also contributing to the public debate, which we are trying to do right now. Of course, the European Commission has done a lot for this with the GRC, a few websites, of course, Remis. We also have francophone platforms. I'd like to point out Mineral Info, which provides for the French public and, of course, abroad, criticality analysis, and also articles written by the French Geological Survey. You'll find here a few selections of those articles relevant to the battery industry regarding the access to nickel, the access to graphite, the access to silicium, and to lithium, analysis of those markets. So through all of this, we hope to contribute to the public debate in France, but also maybe abroad, regarding those raw materials and how they can actually help us develop more sustainable forms of industry. So what about batteries? Well, with the EU Battery Alliance and IPCEI, we've seen strong dynamism in France. I could mention 3 gigafactory projects in France. And of course, there's a general consensus that there's a need for raw materials in quantities that cannot be uniquely sourced from secondary sources, of course, but also sometimes from domestic extraction. There's also a clear lack of industrial plants in Europe for the upper part of the supply chain. I was hoping to make the demonstration that there's actually a large number of key industrial players in France which can contribute to the supply in raw materials for batteries, both lithium, nickel, graphite, cobalt, and a few more now, and throughout the whole supply chain, from exploration to processing to, of course, battery materials, and there's the OEMs, and of course, the critical part, which is also recycling. On Wednesday last week, we tried to bring together a few of those projects and companies. So I could mention a few. So in terms of nickel and cobalt, of course, there's projects abroad, and then there's resources also in New Caledonia, which has a large level of devolution, so we don't directly make policy in, or indirectly make policy in New Caledonia, but we are happy to note that there's plenty of resources, typically. There's many lithium extraction companies, both developing technologies from brine, but also exploration permits, as mentioned, both for hard rock and geothermal exploitation. And then there's a few other interesting know-hows. Typically in the graphite industry, we could mention synthetic graphite, or maybe for the next generation batteries, nanosilicon technologies, as well as chemistry and electrolytes. So we tried to bring together a few of those companies last Wednesday. We thought the event was useful, and we'll try to send out, maybe on Mineral Info, a few elements from that action. Of course, I suspect strong complementarity with the 26 other EU partners, and this is only a very small selection of companies throughout the EU that can build together a future supply chain for battery raw materials. With the resilience plan, France is starting an acceleration strategy for innovative battery projects. And of course, innovative battery projects involves the question of supply, but also the question of substitution, which is sometimes a key issue for a few of the materials we're talking about. I would also like to mention the question of developing sustainable supply practices. I think that's a key issue both for adding value to EU production, but also for remaining coherent in our objective of sustainable development. We've been building a bit on the conflict minerals due diligence, as mentioned before. It's something that all EU member states are trying to, or actually starting to implement. It's not directly linked to the battery ecosystem. It's about gold, it's about tin, it's about tungsten, it's about tantalum, and it's also about a small selection of very grave risks that concern the most difficult part of our supply chains. With batteries, the subject is a bit different, probably larger. We think that the question of due diligence, the OECD 5-step methodology, is currently key for sustainable supply, but we also think that there are new risks, challenges, and initiatives to be built for battery raw materials. I mentioned here nickel, graphite, lithium, and cobalt. We know there's something going on in terms of a common EU regulation regarding this. And then there's other key issues, greenhouse gas emissions and circularity. I'll try to wrap it up reasonably close, reasonably fast. And then there's also, of course, the question of supporting circularity in terms of critical raw materials. For this, the government has announced another acceleration strategy regarding recycling, and one of the 5 key recycling challenges identified one of them is critical raw materials. So this strategy will involve both an industrial program, which will involve supporting industrial innovation and environmental projects for recycling of critical raw materials. And there will also be an R&D scheme that will be coordinated with the National Center for Scientific Research, CNRS, which will also involve the question of critical raw materials. So there's we think, complementarity between Horizon Europe and then what is being done in France, including, for example, for the CNRS action, maybe the lowest TRLs for the future. Thank you very much.
Just need to find a way to stop my alarm before it pings off. Cancel. There you go. Thank you very much, all three speakers. And now we've got approximately a quarter of an hour for Q&A. Let's see if there's anything to post up on Slido. While I wait for that to happen, I've just invented a couple of questions to start us off. So I'm going to ask Eric first. What potential do you see for sourcing critical raw materials through geothermal waters and brines? You've mentioned briefly lithium. How significant are the volumes? How clean is the processing compared to hard rock path? And what other critical raw materials might be extractable from the same source?
Maybe what we should mention first is the clear environmental benefits of using that type of exploitation, which is in terms of greenhouse gases typically, and also many types of nuisances that can exist for those methods. Of course, there's a few key questions which we've seen. There's been some doubts on the feasibility sometimes, the economic models, how realistic they are. So I think there's lots to be proven with those technologies. That's why we're still maybe on an exploration permit level in France. I think French companies which we've discussed want to go slowly and see how well the process can be made. So we don't want excessive enthusiasm regarding those types of exploitation, but for sure there's potential.
Okay. Is there anybody in the room who would like to ask a question? Okay, I see a couple. I'm going to take the gentleman at the back there. And if you could start off by introducing yourself, I would be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Peter Polkowski. I'm developing a lithium borate magnesium strontium deposit in Serbia. We're in the exploration stage. And I have a question. As a Czech citizen, Canadian citizen, and working at the welcome of my host in Serbia, what type of help can we receive in Serbia for support of the critical raw materials, given they're not as yet an EU member?
Okay, I'm going to pass that over to a member of the panel from my team, Milan. What kind of support can a Czech run company operating a project in Serbia expect from our EU Critical Raw Materials Action Plan as support?
Well, this is probably the question which goes directly to the ERMA, I would say, right? One depends on at which stage the project is. If it's in early stages and the technology has to be developed, it's something which is very relevant for our Horizon project, Horizon calls. If it's something which is already ready to be invested and the plans to be set up, that's something which is definitely for the alliance, either the Raw Materials Alliance or the Battery Alliance. Depends on where the project sits.
Roland, do you want to take over from there?
Thank you very much for the question. I just want to add that, as indicated in my presentation, we have these two approaches. First is, are there any specific hurdles, specific issues where we can, open a dialogue to decision makers and identify really challenges that can be solved. So it's really about dialogue, identifying issues, and connecting people. That's this one level. And please engage with us in our dedicated cluster working and looking into raw materials for energy storage and conversion, and the other is more project specific. So we have, as I indicated in IRMA, the approach to really find a case-specific, trying to identify case-specific funding schemes, yeah, public, private, together with the Commission and private investors.
Thank you, Roland. We'll take the question from the gentleman in the middle there.
Thank you, Peter. My name is Sverre Høstmark. I'm representing the Federation of Norwegian Industries. I have a brief question for Milan Gråhol. He showed an illustration of, let's say, different mineral sources in Europe. And what struck me was that, for instance, the European Economic Area country Norway was blanked out. In the same presentation, we learned that that there is a work to get partnerships with Canada, Ukraine, Latin America, and Africa. But I wonder why is it that, because I mean Norway is part of the European Geosurvey. We have the original maps from European Geosurveys are including Norway, but somehow during the process we are redacted out. Why is that? When we can supply copper, we have a pretty close to opening titanium mine, and we seems to be a valuable source for rare earth elements. So why this blanking out? Thank you.
Should I directly?
You go first, and I'm going to add a word after.
No, I think it's not intentional. Norway is embedded in our collaborations already for quite a long time. We have Norwegian industry and R&D in our Horizon projects, also on rare earths, phosphates. So Norway is very much integrated in our value chains, and we of course count on Norway almost as a part of the EU, but it's not part of the EU. That's why it does not appear on the maps. So that's the reason.
And of course, you're in our raw materials supply group and part of our discussions on strategy. But a few weeks ago, I was speaking at a conference organized by Norwegian industry, unions, and the government. And with all those three players there, I said very clearly, if you would like to engage with us in one of these strategic partnerships, our door is open, right? So I'm waiting to see whether the members of the new Norwegian government are interested in, if you like, formalizing the way that we cooperate around the integration of the value chain. Okay, any more questions from the floor? Oh, Slido. Yeah, can you show something on Slido? I believe it exists, but I've never seen it yet. Okay, from Anon, how did DG Grow or IRMA overcome the political agenda of certain groups with relating to permitting new mining projects in the EU, case being rare earths mining in Greenland? So permitting, and Milan, maybe you should take this easy one.
I hope it's not a revenge from you. What we do, and I must say that here personally Peter takes a big role in talking to all the different stakeholders. We make sure that we talk to all parts of the society, from civil society to researchers to local communities, to industry, to member states, to regions. So that's the way how we approach any type of misunderstandings. This is not us against them, it's how to solve an issue. And the issue is to avoid or to adapt to the climate change, okay, in this case, and to keep jobs and growth in Europe as well. So there must be a clear understanding, at least based on the basic principles, and then we will find modalities on concrete projects. Situation in Greenland is changing every few years. I'm following this part already for a decade, and of course the local community has its own right to say and to direct the government what what to do. We try to explain what is important from the EU point of view. That's where we have our competence, and we don't want to interfere in the local affairs.
Thank you, Milan. I'm not going to ask everyone to comment on every question. That way we can have more questions. Can I see the list of 3 questions again, please? Because I can't remember what they were. Okay, I'm going to turn to the question about the views with the biodiversity. Is that the one you wanted to take, Eric? Yeah, go on.
Maybe on mining policy, there's a few points that can be made, that they remain by and large often a national competence, and it is also for the member states to try to develop confidence. And in many ways, I think Europe has pushed for a model of environmental democracy that is ours, that doesn't always apply to many mining projects abroad, and I think it's something we should be aware of and proud of, and those objectives of having a debate, discussing those projects, being transparent, I think those are all basis for actually pushing for projects. And we should be both, when supplying abroad, asking ourselves the questions, well, was there sufficient environmental democracy maybe, but also what are the effects of mining on biodiversity, and having the same standards both ways in Europe, where we all want to take care of our environment. We've seen in the quarrying industry strong movement to bring confidence, and we've seen in France in the quarrying industry again better confidence than maybe 10 or 20 years ago. It's also about showing what can be done. There's some good examples, I think, of mining in Europe that could be put forward, and in quarrying we've also seen similar good examples of after exploitation, how do we put nature back where it was.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Then I think there was a question about wind turbines. I can't remember the precise wording. Where's it gone? Where's the wind turbines? It's disappeared. There was a question about wind turbines, or is it my imagination? Anyway, it's for you, Roland.
Yeah, so I think it was linked to kind of tidal power, or so, if there are alternatives. You know, my response would be, for all, as I mentioned before, it's not only about rare earth, it's about various metals, various materials we need sustainably produced and used and designed and recycled in Europe for all kinds of technologies. So if we don't invest into wind energy, we would have to invest into solar or tidal power. And again, you will need to have functional materials, you know, that enable this energy conversion. And for this you need metals, you know, clean metals produced and processed sustainably. So either way you go, if you want to have this transition, let's invest into these materials supply chains.
Okay, if I can see the Slido again, I'll pick one more question from there. There's the wind turbines, it's back up there again. Sustainable supply of CRMs is a critical issue. Why not establish a specific mission in Horizon Europe linked to IRMA investment cases? Milan.
Sorry?
Yeah, we need to see it again.
No, it moves too quickly. Please, could you come with the questions again? Yeah.
Yeah, the question was, what about a sustainable supply of critical raw material, which is a critical issue in Europe. Why not to establish a specific mission in Horizon Europe linked to ERMA investment cases?
Well, there is a mission is an instrument under Horizon Europe, which is it's addressing a societal challenge. Critical raw materials is an issue, but is not is a step in the supply chain. Is not a societal challenge as such. So it's a tool to solve several societal challenges. So if we talk about missions under Horizon, this is not relevant. However, as I mentioned, we have much bigger budget under Horizon Europe than we had under Horizon 2020 for raw materials. And the whole chapter has moved from environmental part of Horizon under the industrial part of Horizon. So that's there where is the difference. But the raw materials have received much bigger attention than in the previous program.
Okay, and looking at the time, we're almost 5 minutes over, so I will draw things to a close now, and we need some coffee and buns, I believe. So I would like to thank the three panelists, Milan, Eric, and Roland, for their presentations, and I'd also like to thank you all for your questions. Of course, this is only the first event, so there's many more opportunities to ask questions during the week's event and also to do some very important networking over coffee and over lunch. So with that, thank you very much. This first panel is closed. And we come back at 11:45 for the next session. Thank you.